Welcome to Top Stories Hub. Today we've got a new story, one choice that changes everything. Are you ready? For years, I'd been grinding away, stashing every dime I could, and passing up life's little pleasures to build something real. Deep down, I always figured those tough choices would lead to something big, and after endless nights and grueling days, I finally hit my mark. I'd tucked away $400,000 in a sturdy safe at home, a vault I'd set up ages ago, packed with dreams and schemes only I understood. I can still feel the rush of pride when I stared at that number, picturing the life I'd carved out for myself. That morning, I was so pumped I couldn't wait to tell Emma. I could already see her grin, feel the soft brush of her hand as she cheered me on, and imagine the warm hug we'd share. I'd played out every second in my head, each detail lined up perfectly for a big moment to toast our life together. But when the next morning rolled around, everything flipped upside down. I woke to a chilling quiet in what used to be our lively house. The spot beside me in bed was empty, and the air hung thick with a bad vibe. My pulse raced as I shuffled to the kitchen, half hoping to catch Emma whipping up breakfast, ready to party. Instead, the room felt cold, drained of its usual spark. There, on the counter, sat a crisp, folded note in Emma's neat but sharp handwriting, a style I'd known forever, now delivering a gut-punch message. It said, "I poured too much cash into you, so I'm taking what's mine." For a second, I just stood there, stunned, my brain scrambling to make sense of the nightmare that had unfolded while I slept. A sour chuckle caught in my throat, part grief, part raw betrayal. I reached out and grazed the note, like it was a delicate thing that might break if I pressed too hard. Right then, it hit me, all I'd worked for, the sweat, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices that shaped who I was, felt like it had crumbled to nothing. My hands shook as I replayed the note in my head, second-guessing every moment we'd shared. But then, a sly thought slipped in, the safe Emma had swiped wasn't the real deal. I'd been ready for a day like this, when I'd need to pull a fast one. That safe was just a fake, a cheap prop to throw off anyone who tried to mess with me. The actual cash, the fruit of all my years of hustle, was stashed somewhere else, safe and sound, waiting for the perfect time to come out of hiding. Standing there, the twisted humor of it all sank in. Emma thought she'd nabbed my whole fortune, like she'd outsmarted me in some messed up game she'd cooked up. But she'd walked right into a trap I'd set way back, a trap that'd soon lay bare every secret and sacrifice. I was caught in a weird mix of feelings, hurt, heartache, and a tiny spark of smugness knowing my plan was already kicking in. In that still moment, the house seemed to murmur the truth. I'd seen every move she made coming, every step she took was etched in my brain. I shut my eyes, took a long breath, and felt the heavy loss but also a fire to keep going. This was just the start of a wild, winding road, one that'd make us both face the fallout of our choices, our secrets, and the buried truths that had defined us. Holding that note, with the truth of my hidden stash burning in my chest, I knew I had to make a move. The game was on, and I had all my pieces ready. The safe she'd grabbed was just a piece of the bigger con, a trick that'd soon flip the script on her, showing that the real prize wasn't the cash, but the power of knowing things she didn't and the grit of a guy set on taking back what was his. I plopped down at the kitchen table, my head heavy, my heart tangled with questions. The shock from the night before still clung to me as I scanned Emma's note again. It was obvious she'd planned it all out with precision. The ugly truth was staring me down, every step she took was on purpose, and now I was stuck playing her crooked game. I sucked in a deep breath, trying to calm my shaky hands. I'd always trusted her, but now I had to face the fact that she'd been scheming all along, something I'd half expected way back. The fake safe she'd taken was just a decoy, a distraction to keep her off the real prize. I'd stashed the actual money somewhere secret, far from her sneaky reach. As I sat there, lost in my thoughts, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from Jake, my best bud and business partner. His short message, full of worry, said, "You good, man? You didn't show up today." A wave of mixed feelings hit me as I tapped out a quick reply, "Emma's gone. She took the safe. There was a beat before Jake shot back, shocked, and I could feel the urgency in his words when he texted, "You serious?" I wished I could laugh it off, but the reality was colder than I'd ever dreamed. I stared at the note again, a grim smirk fighting through the hurt. Jake's support reminded me I wasn't alone, and as he offered to help, I started to see the faint outline of a plan taking shape. I decided I'd let her think she'd scored a big win. Right then, it clicked that every moment of our life together had been leading to this. I thought back to all those nights I'd spent plotting and saving, knowing I might one day need to push back. The cash was tucked away safe, a hidden gem only I knew about, and it was my ace in the hole to turn things around. I started mentally retracing the past, picking up on the little clues that something was off. Emma's smile, once so warm and familiar, had lately seemed a bit too calculated. I'd brushed off the subtle signs, the quick glances, the quiet tension during our cozy nights. Now, with the safe gone and her note in my hand, it all made sense. I began sketching out my next step, with Jake's words ringing in my head. I'd let her believe she'd clean me out while quietly setting up a comeback that'd show who she really was. My brain was buzzing with ways to use the decoy and what I knew to my advantage. I thought about our life together, the talks we had, the promises we swore, the dreams we built side by side. Now, I was dead set on turning those memories into a tool to call out her betrayal. Looking around, the familiar stuff from our life together felt like ghosts of a time that was both sweet and stinging. It dawned on me that every sacrifice, every late night fretting about what was next, had brought me to this raw moment of truth. With a heavy heart but an iron will, I decided to stick to the plan I'd kept as secret as my hidden cash. I started typing a message to Jake, laying out what I'd do next, and I could feel the adrenaline kicking out the numbness that had settled in. I was going to let Emma think she'd won the whole game, all while collecting every bit of proof to expose her lies. I was torn between grief and grit, knowing our relationship was done for. Her betrayal cut deep, but it also lit a fire in me to take back my life. Right there, with her note in my fist and Jake's steady texts on my phone, I stepped into a world of risky moves and buried secrets. I knew the path ahead was going to be tough, full of hurdles, but I was ready to tackle it head-on. Every heartbeat told me I was still in the fight, and the real treasure wasn't the money, it was the strength of knowing the truth and using it to rebuild my future, just like I'd always planned. I hadn't even had a chance to wrap my head around Emma's betrayal when my phone rang, cutting through the fragile quiet that had settled over me since I found her note. My heart was hammering as I checked the caller ID, a number I didn't know blinking on the screen. I paused for a split second before picking up, my voice low and shaky. "This is Ryan," I said. A calm, professional voice came back, "Ryan Carter." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me, wondering who'd be calling right now. The guy introduced himself as Paul Thompson, a name that didn't ring any bells but felt like it mattered somehow. He said he was my father-in-law's lawyer and that he'd been trying to get a hold of me for a while. My gut twisted as his words landed, a cold chill creeping through me. "What's this about?" I asked, my voice giving away how uneasy I felt. There was a short pause, heavy with things unsaid, before Paul's tone turned serious. "I'm sorry to tell you, but Mr. Johnson passed away last week." Those words slammed into me like a freight train. It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. Emma's dad, the guy who'd always been kind of distant but a steady part of our lives, was gone. My head spun as I tried to piece together this new mess. "He's gone," I muttered, my voice barely making it past the thudding in my ears. Paul went on, explaining that before he died, Mr. Johnson had set up some major financial plans, stuff that was going to shake up my life directly. Every word he said made things feel even more tangled. I hung on every detail as he talked about the estate and some paperwork that needed my attention ASAP. Right then, I was hit with not just the pain of Emma's betrayal, but the fact that my whole world was shifting again. It felt like a cruel twist of fate. Just as I was starting to deal with Emma vanishing on me, the news of her dad's death and his secret money moves piled on another layer of chaos. My brain was racing, trying to keep up with what it all meant. Paul's voice sounded almost robotic, laying out legal details with a sharpness that made it feel even more unreal. I started thinking back to the handful of talks I'd had with Emma's dad, always stiff and formal, and now his absence felt heavier than I could have imagined. Paul pushed for a meeting, stressing that we needed to go over the plans his client had left behind soon. I was torn. Part of me didn't want to deal with it, but another part felt like I had to. This could be my shot to dig up more truths hidden under all the lies. When I hung up, my hands were still shaking, and I was swamped with grief, betrayal, and a growing sense of determination. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made over the years, the late nights, the relentless chase for a dream that now felt both messed up and justified. Emma's choices had pushed me to a fork in the road, and Paul's unexpected call hinted at possibilities I'd never even considered. Every word he'd said carried a quiet promise of change, like maybe things could swing back in my favor. I sank into my old office chair, the cool leather wrapping around me as the room blurred out. I realized I was caught up in a messy web of family ties and legal moves that went way beyond just one betrayal. Learning that Mr. Johnson had passed wasn't just a door closing, it was the start of something new, a sign of bigger things coming that'd make Emma and me face the stuff we'd kept buried for years. I could practically feel fate's wheels spinning, slow and steady, like every second was pushing us toward a showdown we couldn't dodge. In that deep, quiet moment, with Paul's calm voice still bouncing around in my head, I made up my mind to sit down with him. I was determined to dig into every detail of these money moves, to figure out what kind of legacy Emma's dad had left me, and, most of all, to get a grip on the real ties holding our families together. My whole life had flipped upside down, and even with everything spinning out of control, I held on to a shred of hope that I could still steer where this was headed. The pieces were falling into place for some big reveals that had forced me to deal with what Emma had done and the hidden parts of a life I thought I had figured out. I took a slow, grounding breath, grabbed my jacket, and got ready to jump into the mess ahead, knowing full well this road was about to change everything I'd ever held true. I was sitting in my study, the soft ticking of that old clock filling the room as I mulled over how I'd ended up here. The last few days kept playing back in my head, slow and clear, like some gritty movie. Emma's betrayal had hit me hard, but through the ache, I found a sharpness I hadn't felt in years with her. Even before that awful morning when she took off with the safe, I'd picked up on little hints, sneaky plans and quiet schemes she'd been hiding all along. Now, with that fake safe she thought held my cash in my hands, I couldn't help but smirk at the bitter twist of it all. She was so sure she'd snatched my savings, clueless that the real haul was stashed somewhere else, locked away tight long before I ever suspected she'd turn on me. Right then, I decided I'd play the game of trickery too. Every bit of our past, the sweet smiles, the late-night chats, even the doubts I never voiced, turned into pieces of a mystery I was hell-bent on cracking. I'd spent nights digging through old texts and flipping through photos, each one a quiet clue to a life that wasn't what it used to be. The deeper I dug into those memories, the more obvious it got that she'd spun her lies with careful, cold skill. I started connecting the dots, the tiny pause in her voice, the quick looks she'd shoot to strangers, the polished lines she'd rehearse to cover up something uglier. Jake, my rock-solid buddy and go-to guy, had stuck by me through every curveball. I could still hear his steady voice over bitter coffee at that little cafe. Ryan, this ain't just about the cash. It's about getting the truth out and taking back what's yours. His words were like a lifeline in the middle of all that betrayal. That talk lit a fire in me to let everyone think I was the wrecked guy Emma wanted me to be, someone crushed by losing it all. Out in the open, I'd act like a broken, desperate mess, but behind the scenes, I was piecing together every shred of proof, every whisper of her double cross, to build a case she couldn't wiggle out of. I set up low-key meetups with old pals and folks I trusted, dropping subtle hints to make them question the story she'd told. Their puzzled faces and careful words let me know my quiet version was sticking. I kept track of every slip-up, every hushed fib, every time her act faltered, even if it was just for a heartbeat. Every new clue pumped me up more, each one bringing me closer to the day her whole tower of lies would come crashing down. Late at night, with the shadows stretching long in my study and that clock's steady beat the only sound, I laid out my next plays like a chess pro eyeing the winning move. I could picture it, her smug front falling apart when I hit her with a mountain of evidence she couldn't deny. I remembered a day when her smile, once so genuine, had felt oddly staged, and that memory now drove me forward. I sharpened my plan down to the finest detail, settling on a public face of weakness and gloom to keep her off guard. But under that cover, I was pulling strings for a comeback that'd shine a light on every buried truth. The room buzzed with a tension that weighed me down but also fired me up, like destiny had lined up every piece of this crazy puzzle. I was ready to put it all on the line, not just to get my money back, but to grab hold of my pride and the honesty she'd stomped all over. Sitting there, I soaked in the heaviness of my choice, knowing every note I jotted down, every thought racing through me, was a step toward the big face-off. The stillness in my study hummed with the promise of a reckoning, a time when her tricks would run smack into reality, and the raw truth of her betrayal would be out for all to see. I shut my eyes, took a long, firm breath, and let the fire in my gut lead me into the shadows ahead, ready to roll out this game of deception just like I'd drawn it up, sure that the end was close and justice, even if it stung, was coming fast. I was parked in the living room with Jake right there, both of us staring at the empty spot where my dreams with Emma used to live. I'd known from the jump that her walking out wasn't some random gut punch, it was a move she'd planned out cold. I'd rigged up that decoy safe to throw her off, and now she was basking in the glow of a win she didn't really have. I leaned in, keeping my voice low and steady, like I was spilling secrets to the dark. She's convinced she's got me beat, Jake. Every step she takes from here is gonna be what unravels her own game. Jake gave a slow nod, his eyes showing both hurt and resolve. Then we go with it. Let her think you're done for good. I shut my eyes and ran through the life we'd had, a reel of little highs and buried grudges that all landed me here. I thought back to the endless nights I'd spent mapping out every part of my future, never guessing the one I loved would pull off a betrayal this slick. That weight settled on me as I cooked up the trap. I figured I'd let the world see me as a guy with nothing left, wrecked by losing everything, money and heart included. I started spreading a story, a tale I'd crafted just right, through buddies and folks we knew, painting me as a dude whose life fell apart when Emma and that safe vanished. Every quiet chat, every worried look, every choked-up word from people who used to know me fit like puzzle pieces into my scheme. Jake and I burned hours hashing out the plan, plotting each move like a commander gearing up for the last push. I needed her to buy that my life was a wreck, so when she reached out, I'd be locked and loaded. I want her thinking she's left me with nothing but a mess, I said, my voice soft but solid. Jake shot back, then we let her come to you, and that's when we drop the truth. You make her think she's running the show, and when she's cockiest, we hit hard. I could already hear her smug texts in my head, that snide edge as she bragged to herself. I wrote back with fake desperation, a cry for help that'd drop her defenses flat. That day, I sent her, I'm lost without you, Emma. I've got nothing, and every day's a fight to keep going. I loaded those words with enough weakness to make sure she'd see me as a guy with no fight left. Sure enough, she bit. Her reply came fast, dripping with fake pity and a smug little twist. Maybe we can figure something out, she texted, a line I read with a sinking heart and a sly grin. Every back and forth was a play in our high-stakes game now, each text a brick in the path to showing who she really was. Jake and I kept fine-tuning the setup, making sure every talk, every sad act I put on, every rumor floating around our friends backed up the story I was selling. I started meeting up with folks from our old crew, spinning a tale of heartbreak so real it'd tug at even the toughest hearts. In every bit of my practiced collapse, I sowed doubts about Emma's honesty. I was dead set on making her so-called win look like a curse she'd regret, not the victory she thought she'd scored. As days stretched into weeks, I gathered every scrap of proof that could poke holes in her big scheme, logging our talks, taping our run-ins, even jotting down the little changes in her voice when we spoke. Each bit was a strand in a web, slowly building a picture of a woman who'd fooled me and everyone else. I knew the day she'd have to face the music was coming fast, a moment when her fancy lies would cave under their own weight. With every public show of my fake misery, I spun a story that broke hearts and sold the lie perfectly. I let her think she'd walked away with everything, while behind the curtain, I was setting up her big fall. The trap was ready, every detail locked in tight. I felt a rush of excitement tangled with a deep sadness for what we'd turned into. Right then, I got it, the real win wasn't about cash or payback, it was about pulling the truth out from under all her lies. The game was live, and I was set to play it out, till the last move hit the board. I was sitting by myself in the faint light of early morning, the steady tick of the clock in my study cutting through the thick quiet wrapping around my thoughts. Every second, every breath I took felt like a careful play in a high-stakes game where my whole soul was on the line. I'd settled on dragging this out, a slow, thought-out approach that'd push Emma to show every crack in the perfect front she'd built. Out in the world, I let myself look like a guy torn apart by what I'd lost, my life just a pile of broken pieces and regrets. But behind those sad eyes, my brain was buzzing, working like clockwork, turning every memory and hushed secret into a stepping stone toward the showdown I knew was coming. Weeks started blending together as I nailed down my role as a hopeless wreck. I'd shoot off texts and make quiet calls, pouring out fake despair about how her taking everything had left me broke and hollow. "I've got nothing left inside," I'd admit, and those words hit so real even I got a little spooked by how convincing they sounded. Emma's replies always had this smug little edge, like she was enjoying watching me fall apart, never guessing each message she sent was just another piece moving on my secret game board. I kept every word we swapped locked down tight, saving every little detail in case I needed hard proof of her backstabbing later. Every chat, every offhand comment she tossed out, I picked apart like a hawk. I'd dig through old emails and replay talks we'd had way back, hunting for any tiny slip, a spot where her polished lies didn't hold up. Alone in my study, with just the faint hum of the city outside breaking the stillness, I built up a file that got heavier every day. Jake and I would pull all-nighters, matching up facts and fitting together the messy picture of lies Emma had spun so slickly. Every small glitch in her story, every casual remark, turned into a key thread in the web of proof I was knitting together bit by bit. In those quiet hours right before the sun came up, the load of living two lives would weigh on me hard. I'd sit there, staring at the mess of notes and recordings, feeling a twinge of sadness for the guy I used to be, the one who trusted our promises without a second thought. But even when those old times stung, I held tight to the belief that every tough call, every fake tear I shed, was a piece of the bigger picture. I had to come off as weak, beat down enough to trick her into thinking she had the upper hand. Under that beaten-down act, though, was a fire that wouldn't quit, pushing me to take back not just my cash, but the honesty and pride she'd ripped away without a care. I planned out every public move like a pro. I'd show up at get-togethers and meetings looking like a shell of myself, a walking proof of how bad I'd been hit. But back in my study, away from prying eyes, I'd break down every moment, jotting down how a pitying look or a random comment added to the story I was shaping. This long haul was all about how people saw me just as much as the hard facts. I needed everyone, buddies, coworkers, even random folks I knew, to buy that I was a guy crushed by life, so when the time came to pull the curtain back on Emma's real self, the shock would hit twice as hard. I'd tune in close to the whispers floating around, the little changes in how people talked about my rough luck. Every kind word, every story that brought a tear, locked in the idea that I'd hit the bottom. But every one of those moments just stoked the hidden spark inside me, a drive to turn this fake weakness into the tool that'd bring me back up. The twist wasn't lost on me, the broken act she wanted to see was gonna be what took her down. With every message I crafted and every sad scene I played out, I wasn't just waiting, I was flipping her cockiness right back at her. Now, as the first rays of daylight crept over the skyline, that old rush of grit kicked in strong. I was set for the next step in this drawn-out game. All the evidence was lined up, every sneaky hint of her lies was filed away safe. I could feel it, the moment her overconfidence would trip her up and spill too much was getting close. When that hit, all her lies, all the truths she'd tucked away, would pile up into a case so solid no one could argue it. In that early morning hush, I swore to myself I'd ride this out to the end, and when it was done, the truth would blaze so bright nobody could look away. I'd had a hunch for a while that Emma was cooking up something big, and today was the day it'd all break open. She'd set up a meeting with a bunch of investors in a fancy hotel conference room, dangling big profits and safe bets based on deals she'd put together. I'd spent who knows how many hours with Jake piling up proof of her tricks, and now every bit of it was ready to roll out. Walking in, I kept my head down, my heart thumping, knowing I was about to rip apart the tangle of lies she'd woven so tight. The room was packed with folks in sharp suits, their eyes lit up with hope as Emma stepped up front, flashing a cool smile that didn't let on to the storm inside her. She laid out a string of projects, hotel deals and big return investments, her voice steady, tossing out numbers and dates so clear even the doubters looked impressed. Every line she fed them was part of her practiced show, meant to hook these strangers into her made-up game. I hung back, my mind spinning as I thought about all those late nights listening to her run through her lines, catching the little hiccups in her tales. Jake had slipped a rumor into the crowd, a quiet doubt about whether her contracts were legit or her promises held water. I could feel the room getting tense as people started shooting sideways looks, suspicion bubbling up. Right when Emma was hyping a deal with sky-high payoffs, I sneaky-like fired up my phone. The screen popped on with a security clip I'd loaded, a video of Emma caught off guard, messing with a safe that was just a prop, a fake cornerstone of the lie she'd built everything on. At first, the video ran quiet, but then a low buzz spread as the investors started watching. Their faces flipped from curious to stunned as they saw her two-faced game laid out plain. I noticed a couple of them squirming in their chairs, and I knew her shiny little world was starting to crack. Emma's face went white as she picked up on the shift in the air. Her smooth talk stumbled, and for the first time that day, I caught a flicker of panic in her eyes. The room buzzed with shock and anger, and one by one, the investors started heading out, too thrown to buy into her con anymore. I got up slow, a mix of hurt and victory washing over me as I let the video keep rolling. Every frame was another hammer blow to her fancy setup, and I could tell the tide had turned. The clip showed it all, the hush-hush meetings, the secret whispers, and the second she grabbed that fake safe everyone now knew was a sham. When the last investor picked up his stuff and walked out quiet, I stepped up. I locked eyes with Emma, her face now a mix of regret and disbelief. Right then, every stab of betrayal, every lie she'd spun, was out there in stark truth for all to see. I kept my voice even, hiding the chaos tearing me up inside. Emma, you didn't just lose money today. You lost the trust of every single person who bought into you. Her eyes hunted mine for a scrap of forgiveness, but all I saw was the mirror of her own collapse. A heavy sadness settled in me for the love Emma and I once had, but I knew deep down this was the only way to make things right. With all those investors clued in on the real story, her whole house of lies came crashing down. I walked out of that room slow, every step dragging the weight of a past full of promises and dreams of an honest future. Right then, stepping into the chilly night air, it hit me, this big setup wasn't just about calling out her deceit, it was about grabbing back my own truth and the pride I'd battled to keep alive. I stood there under the streetlights, the cool breeze brushing my face as I ran through everything in my head. Every late-night plan, every hush-hush talk with Jake, had built up to this make-or-break moment. I could still picture those long hours digging through papers, the endless calls that nailed down her lies, and the quiet grit that kept me pushing even when it felt hopeless. This wasn't just about the cash, it was a fight for what's right, for the truth. My chest ached thinking back to when trust was the glue between us, when I was sure Emma was the good woman I loved. Now, that faith stained forever with her tricks and betrayal. But as rough as it hurt, I knew the truth was gonna set me free in the end. The echo of quick steps and low voices in the hotel's empty halls faded as I kept walking, each stride ringing with my determination. I started thinking about what's next, a life where the past's shadows wouldn't chain me down, where I could build something real and honest. My thoughts drifted to a promise I'd made myself in silence, no more letting lies steer my road. Jake's soft words came back to me, nudging me to hold my head up through the storm. Right then, I felt this huge wave of strength and clear-headedness. Every secret I'd dug up, every tough word I'd said today, was a step toward starting fresh. The night wrapped around me like a cool hug, and I knew this ride was far from done. There were still fights to take on, truths to uncover, but I was ready for whatever came my way. Every memory, every mark left on me, proved how tough my spirit could be. I sucked in a deep breath, letting the night fuel me with a calm resolve, knowing the path ahead might twist, but it'd be lit by truth. I was sitting in my quiet office, Emma across from me, her shoulders slumped and her eyes flickering with shock and fear. The room felt thick with stillness as I leaned back in my chair, a folder sitting there holding the messy fate of our lives. "You trapped me," she murmured, her voice so faint it shook, like the words were too big to get out. I locked eyes with her, steady as a rock, and said, "Nah, Emma. You dug your own hole." I pushed the folder her way slow, watching her eyes snap to the cover. It just said, "Your choices." Inside was a one-way ticket to some small, sleepy town miles away, a clean slate I'd set up for her, a shot to ditch the life of lies and broken trust she'd built. Her hands trembled as she flipped through it, the ticket sitting on top like a quiet invite to something new. "What if I say no?" she asked, her voice picking up a desperate edge. I set another folder next to it, this one packed with a police report and every bit of proof about her cons, her cheats, and her theft. My voice stayed cool and firm as I told her, "You grab the ticket, or I take this to the cops." Those words hung there like a done deal, and for the first time since this all kicked off, I saw real fear spark in her eyes. All those years watching her every move, planning it out, had landed me here. I thought back to our past, quiet dinners where her little lies hid behind fake smiles, late nights when I started piecing together what she was really up to, and that last stab when she took off with the fake safe. It had all been rolling toward this, and now the truth was too loud to ignore. I could see the war in her eyes, regret clashing with stubbornness, as she reached for the ticket, hesitant. I'd worked every angle of this plan tight, making sure every rumor I'd spread, every scrap of evidence I'd stacked up, would corner her into facing what she'd done. That ticket wasn't just a way out, it was a sign of a fresh start she didn't earn, a nudge that every choice she'd made had brought her to this fork in the road. I sat quiet, watching her fingers hover over the ticket, like she could feel how heavy her calls had been. The room closed in, the air so tense you could slice it. I remembered those long nights plotting, the soft pangs of grief when I realized our love was lost in a maze of her deceit. Every hard choice I'd made, every second I'd doubted, had dragged me to this final play in a game years in the making. That second folder's evidence wouldn't just tank her name, it had cut me loose from the lies that had tied us up. In that hushed moment, it was obvious what she had to do. I'd laid out this showdown like a pro, knowing this last step would force her to pick. I could almost hear the ghosts of every quiet talk and busted promise as she sat there, staring down a truth she couldn't duck anymore. Tears welled up as she finally reached for the ticket, her move locking in her fate. It was her call now, one that'd decide if she could walk away from the dishonest life she'd lived. I spoke up one more time, my voice low and sure. "Here's your shot to start clean. Own up to it and leave the old you behind, or deal with the fallout of every lie you've told." Her hand froze over the ticket, and right then, I felt our past snap shut. The office, with its familiar stuff and dim light, stood quiet as this chapter of betrayal and broken dreams closed. When she finally grabbed it, a lone tear rolled down her cheek, carrying grief and a nod to what was done. I knew that little move meant the long game was over, and I'd played the winning hand. The quiet after that was bittersweet, a clean break from a rough story and the kickoff to something new for us both. It had been months since Emma's whole world fell apart, and every new day made me wrestle with the wreckage of what we'd had. Those first empty days slowly turned into a solid drive to put back together what she'd smashed, one piece, one tough moment at a time. I dove headfirst into handling my late father-in-law's estate, not just to keep his memory alive, but to build something lasting that stood miles apart from the lies that had messed us up. Every paper I went over, every meeting I sat through, reminded me life's real worth isn't just in bucks, it's in sticking to what's right. In the middle of all that chaos that nearly swallowed me, I stumbled on a weird kind of purpose. I took it on myself to start a fund, something to quietly pay back all the folks Emma had ripped off over the years, a small stab at justice in a world that had gotten too hard. I'd sit down with people whose lives she'd turned upside down with her fake promises, hearing out their tales of loss and double-cross while I jotted down every detail real careful. Their hurt hit me deep, and I swore I'd make it right over time, patching up the breaks her greed had left behind. The grind was brutal and never let up. Days melted into each other as I waded through stacks of legal papers and sat through meeting after meeting. But every hurdle lit a little flicker of hope in me, a gut feeling that even after the ugliest betrayals, there's still a shot at making things right. Meanwhile, Emma had ditched the flashy, high-roller life she used to live. Word around town was she'd landed a gig at a small diner, a world away from the over-the-top way she used to show off. I kept tabs on her from afar, not to be mean, but to keep myself grounded about what happens when you build everything on a pile of lies. Sometimes, while I was holed up in my simple office, surrounded by files and old memories, I'd catch a quick clip of her on the local news, just a passing shot of a woman who'd swapped extravagance for a bare-bones life. It kicked up a mess of feelings in me, sadness for what we'd thrown away, a sharp kind of glee at the justice of it all, and a nagging ache for the love that once promised so much. I busted my hump to keep my father-in-law's memory alive, pouring effort into his estate's future and local projects meant to bring back trust in hard work and doing right. That restitution fund, tiny as it was, turned into a lifeline for folks who'd been hurting quiet, and every little win, no matter how small, helped patch up the raw scars her betrayal left behind. Nights hit me the hardest, when Emma's old laughs and the cozy vibes of our early days tangled up with the cold fact of her double-crossing. I'd park myself by the window, streetlights glowing soft as they watched me sit alone, thinking over the choices that landed me here. I'd run through all those sacrifices, the restless nights full of second-guessing, and the steady drive that kept me going. Every mark, inside and out, was proof that the road to fixing things was rough, but it held the hope of starting over too. In those still, late-night moments, I made up my mind not to let what happened run my life. Instead, I'd use it as fuel to shake things up, a steady nudge that even when everything's pitch black, you can still find the guts to get back up. Bit by bit, as the fun started lightening the load for the people she'd burned, I found some peace in the small steps forward that kicked off a fresh page for me. Her betrayal had changed me, toughening me up but also opening my eyes to the folks who'd been hurt right alongside me. I knew the path ahead was gonna be long and messy, but each day brought a new spark of purpose, a faith that the truth, even when it stings, would carve out a future rooted in real trust and solid grit. So, with every tick of the clock, I kept pushing on, hauling the past along not like dead weight, but like a hard-earned lesson steering me toward a better, truer tomorrow. I took my time driving down the curvy road to the little town where Emma was now, my heart weighed down by old times and the end of what we'd had. The sky was brushed with twilight's gentle colors as I pulled over a block from the plain cafe where she worked. Every mile I'd covered reminded me of the life we'd pieced together and the love that soured into betrayal. I thought back to the years of dreams we'd spun, the quiet promises we traded, and how trust just wore away until we hit this final split. I wasn't here to throw anger in her face, but to say one last goodbye, a chance to drop all we'd lost and see that sometimes letting go is the only way to heal. I climbed out of the car slow, each step ringing with echoes of happier days. The evening air felt cool and peaceful, smoothing out even the roughest bits of regret. Walking up to the cafe, my head replayed all those nights of plotting and pain, the times I'd wondered if we could ever glue our shattered life back together. Now, standing at the edge of her new reality, it clicked. No matter how deep those cuts ran, there's something beautiful in moving on and owning what can't be changed. Inside, the low hum of voices and the clatter of cups set a soft beat to the scene. Emma was behind the counter, moving sharp and steady as she topped off sugar packets. Her eyes caught mine for a second, flashing with surprise and sadness. Time stretched thin right then, and I knew this was the peak of everything that had gone down. I stepped up to the counter, measured, like I was walking on thin ice. Without saying a thing, I dug into my coat pocket and pulled out an envelope I'd put together careful, a last token to close out the wild ride we'd been on. I slid it across to her. Her hands shook as she took it, and for a beat, I saw not fight in her eyes, but a heavy, wordless sorry. Inside was my father-in-law's silver pocket watch, a piece that used to stand for hope, family, and fresh starts. Now, it was a sign of the end, a hint that every finish plants the start of something new. "Why'd you bring this?" she asked, voice soft as a breath, thick with feelings that didn't need spelling out. I held her stare, calm and firm, and said, "'Cause change has to kick off somewhere, and this is our last shot to look back at who we were without all the screw-ups dragging us down." Tears brimmed as she opened it slow, the shiny watch sitting there with a few worn-out photos of good days. Seeing those hit her hard, nostalgia, regret, and a quiet giving in all mixed up. I stood there, not saying a word, letting the weight of that moment sink into us both. I didn't feel any win in her pain, just a bittersweet sense that we'd both been caught up in choices from way back. This goodbye was it, no more tries to fix or grab back what was gone. It was me letting go of the dream we'd had, shutting a page full of lies and letdowns. Before I walked off, I stopped and gave her one last look. "Emma," I said low, "I hope you find the truth and some peace someday, stuff we could never hang on to." With that, I turned away. The cafe door shut soft behind me, like it was locking the past up in the night. Heading back to my car, I felt our history lift off me slow. The road ahead was a question mark, but it was mine to take on solo. Every mile was a move toward a future shaped by tomorrow's promise, not yesterday's mess-ups, a place where betrayal's hurt could turn into strength to forgive myself. In that last farewell, I found a shaky hope that even the worst wounds might heal someday. With the watch's silver shine lingering like a ghost of what was, I drove into the dark, leaving behind a story of hurt and double-dealing, and opening up to the quiet chance of making things right again. That's the end of today's adventure on Top Stories Hub. Please like, subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments.